Campaign 2020 tonight. Likely Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is making the case that he is the person to lead the country out of the coronavirus pandemic. So we sat down today via Zoom with one of the campaign's top surrogates, Pete Buttigieg, to talk about that crisis and an allegation facing Biden. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, thank you for joining me. We really appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
More than 1.2 million people in the U.S. at this point have been diagnosed with the coronavirus. More than 70,000 deaths to this point. What would a Biden administration do about the coronavirus and have done about the coronavirus that the Trump administration has not?
Well, first of all, take this threat seriously. Look, the Obama-Biden administration had set up an office in the National Security Council to deal with these kinds of pandemic threats. The Trump administration took it apart, and it's been scrambling ever since this emerged. What we need is a clear and specific plan, as Joe Biden has put forward, to make sure that we get the kind of testing we need, to make sure that we're able to trace the contacts of those who have been exposed, and to make sure that when a vaccine is developed, that it can actually be quickly and equitably distributed to as many Americans and as many communities as quickly as possible.
The president has said, look, he shut down travel from China. Testing has now ramped up, even if it was a bit late. And the U.S. is on track right now to have a vaccine by 2021, if all goes according to plan. He says he did the best job he possibly could have.
Well, that's simply not true. The president 2 months ago, I think yesterday, said that everyone in America who wants a test can get one. That was not true when he said it, and it's still not true today. And of course, massively increasing our ability to do tests is the best way to reopen our economy in a way that's safe. They started to put out a halfway decent plan only to abandon it. The president's basically giving up on his own White House's metrics for what it takes to reopen as he starts saying liberate without any indication of the human cost of it.
Would you open up South Bend, Indiana right now? And in what way? What process would you use?
Well, I think my successor here in South Bend is following the right approach, which is to make sure that any guidance about reopening is directly connected to facts on the ground. You don't reopen because of a date. You reopen because of the data. If the data is telling you that the contagion is falling past a certain point, then you know that it can be safely done. If, and only if, we also institute the kind of measures we need, whether it's distancing, whether it's masks, or other steps.
President Trump said yesterday he's pushing ahead with a plan to bring a case before the Supreme Court that would eliminate Obamacare, depending on the decision. Has this pandemic changed the way that the Vice President Biden, thinks about healthcare and healthcare policy in this country?
Well, you know, Joe Biden's been very clear about the fight to not only preserve the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, but expand it. And the idea that now, of all times, the Trump administration is pushing ahead with an effort to kill healthcare for millions of Americans could not be more perverse and more upside down. With Joe Biden as president, we're going to see an expansion, not a reduction, in the availability of healthcare through measures like what was in the ACA, making sure more Medicaid-eligible Americans get coverage right away. And for the Trump White House to be trying to cut healthcare at a moment like this shows you just how far they've gone from the everyday lives of Americans who are actually going to have to live with the consequences of these lawsuits.
I do want to ask you, switch gears here, ask you about the allegation from a former Biden staffer, Tara Reade. She says that in 1993, then Senator Biden sexually assaulted her. The vice president has denied it. Do you believe him?
I do, and let me add this. You know, there are different ways to handle these things when they come up, which is always challenging, especially having seen just how important it is to ensure that that women are heard and that accusers have a chance to get information taken seriously. So look at what the vice president did. A no-holds-barred interview. I think he took more than 20 questions in one sitting, and a call to release all of the relevant documents. Think about what our president has done in case after case after case of highly credible accusations, including an accusation that came from his own voice as he boasted of sexual assault. And yet his approach is not to subject himself to that kind of questioning, not to provide that kind of transparency. And it shows the difference, not just in credibility, but the difference in how each of these leaders treat situations like this and treat women in general.
Let's talk running mates now. There's a recent poll showing that our senator, one of our senators here in Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, is the favorite among Democratic voters at this point to be on the ticket with Joe Biden. Do you support her?
Well, I admire her enormously. Again, even or especially in the process of us being in a competition, I came to see how powerful her intellect is and her passion for fighting for working families and taking on the sources of economic and racial injustice in this country. She'd make a terrific vice president, and she continues to be such an important leader in our party and in the country.
Pete Buttigieg, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe.
Thank you. You too.